Honestly, I think Ken did a lot for me, but I didn't have the luxury of considering others at that time, so I must have sounded pretty selfish. No, instead, I know someone who is strong in that kind of thing through my friend. I can introduce you to him, but it might cost money. What? It'll cost money? Yes, it seems so. What will you do? How much? From what I've been told, it seems about 500,000 yen to start. 500,000 yen? For me back then, even though I was working, paying 500,000 yen was an impossible amount. I was reluctant to spend the money, but if it meant being freed from my fear and suffering, there was no choice. Okay, when can you introduce me? He seems to be in Gunma right now. I'll ask my friend. Wait a bit, the story goes back and forth, but while I was chanting Namu Amida Butsu in front of the Buddha statue, my mother was on the phone with my grandmother. From my grandmother, the consultation went to Miss, more like a plea for help it seemed, and eventually Miss S agreed to come. However, S is very busy and above all quite elderly. It was decided she would come 3 weeks later. In other words, I had to spend 3 weeks in fear and anxiety in a situation where anything could happen at any time. Because of this situation, I had to do whatever I could to calm myself down. Ken called back after 11 p.m. Sorry for the wait. I talked to my friend and he said he could see you tomorrow. Tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow's Sunday, right? I see. It's been 5 days since I saw that thing. I had completely forgotten about work. Got it. Thanks. Will you come to my house? He said he would go to your house. He'll go by car, so email me the address. What about you? I want you to come. I'll go. About the money, is it okay if I pay later? It might be fine. Got it. Call me when you're nearby. It was a poorly organized conversation, but it couldn't be helped for a young man like me. That night I had a dream. A young woman wearing a white kimono was kneeling next to me as I slept. When I noticed her, she bowed deeply with 3 fingers touching the ground, then left the room. Before leaving the room, she bowed deeply again. I didn't know if this dream had anything to do with it, but the next day I received a call from Ken around noon. I guided him over the phone and greeted him. 3 people came, Ken and his friend, and a man probably in his late 30s. I couldn't think of him as a normal person. He looked a bit like a thug, and I couldn't imagine what kind of work he did. Because I didn't explain well, my parents were skeptical. I'm sure it's a fake name, but the man introduced himself as Hayashi. I've heard about you from him. You're in quite a predicament. I'm sorry for bringing this up now. T is me, and the person I'm talking to in the conversation is Ken. Please read it that way. So Hayashi-san, can you explain your relationship with him? Well, there's nothing you can do about this as a layman. Sir, you might find this hard to believe, but T-kun is in danger. So he came to us saying that his friend T-kun is in danger and needs help. That's why we're here. Is T really in danger? Well, I've had quite a bit of experience with this kind of thing, but this is the first time I've seen it this bad. The room is filled with negative energy. Excuse me, but may I ask what your job is? Ah, are you curious? Well, of course, if someone suddenly comes and tells you this, it's suspicious. But you know, if we don't perform an exorcism and cleanse the area, T-kun will be taken away, you know? Can we ask for your help? If you leave it to me, this kind of thing needs a specialist like me. But, you know, there's a risk for us too, so we need a little something for that. You know what I mean, right? How much should we prepare? Well, we need about 200. That's expensive, isn't it? Even as it is, he's taking the time to come here because he wants to help his friend. If you say no, it's none of my business, you know. But I think it's a cheap price to save T with just 2 million yen. Besides, T was not dealt with when he went to the temple, right? There are only a handful of people who understand. Again, are you going to look for it from scratch? I was silent. When I heard about 2 million yen, I looked at Ken, and Ken looked awkward. In the end, neither my father nor my mother could say anything more about what they didn't understand, and reluctantly we decided to leave it to Hayashi. Hayashi immediately said he would perform an exorcism that night. He said he was going to prepare and left. He took the money for the preparation from my parents on his way out. When he returned in the evening, he lit a candle, pasted papers like talismans all over the room, placed a crystal ball on his lap, held a rosary, and poured what I think was sake into a cup. It somehow started to look the part. "Hayashi, I'm going to purify you now. Repent. Father, Mother, I'm sorry, but could you leave the house once? The spirits may also go to you." Reluctantly, my parents decided to wait in the car outside. As the sun set and it grew dark, the purification began. While chanting something like a sutra, Hayashi dipped his finger into the cup at a certain timing and splashed the drops on me. I was half in doubt, lying on the futon with my eyes closed. That's what Hayashi told me to do. It had been quite a while since the purification began. The voice of the sutra started to break off. Since my eyes were closed, all I could understand was the unpleasant atmosphere and the sutra that was gradually getting stranger. I didn't notice it at first, but my neck was particularly painful. Beyond the itchiness, I was clearly feeling pain. As I gritted my teeth to endure the pain, not opening my eyes, the sutra stopped. But something is strange. I'm not sure what it is, but the ending was abrupt, and there was no voice when it was over. Above all, the pain in my neck did not ease at all, but rather increased. I feel a chill, and I feel like something is straddling the futon. I must not open my eyes. That was the only thing that was absolutely necessary. I knew that. I opened my eyes. When I opened my eyes, a terrifying sight came into view. Hayashi was sitting on the right side of me, lying on the futon, performing the purification. When I opened my eyes, he was sitting straight in between, facing Hayashi. He had his hands on his knees, stretched out his upper body, and stared into Hayashi's face. There was only about a fist's width of space between Hayashi's face and his face. Looking curious, with his head tilted, constantly moving his face like an owl, muttering something I couldn't hear, he stared into Hayashi's face. Looking back, he might have been whispering something to Hayashi. Hayashi, a little downcast, with his gaze lowered, not blinking, his mouth sloppily open, drooling. His face seemed to be smiling a little. He nodded a little from time to time. I was staring at him, forgetting to blink. Suddenly, his neck stopped moving. The next moment, he turned his face towards me. In a hurry, I shut my eyes tight, pulled the duvet over me, and kept chanting Namu Amida Butsu. The sight of him moving his face like an owl near my face floated up on my eyelids. I was scared. I heard a clattering noise, and the sound of someone running down the stairs. It seems like Hayashi ran away. I was scared and kept hiding in the duvet. When my parents came, turned on the lights, and pulled off the futon, they found me curled up and rigid. Hayashi, without so much as a glance at my parents, got in a car and disappeared somewhere with Ken and Ken's friend, who had been waiting. From what I heard later from Ken, he didn't say anything but get the car out. I, whose situation had gone from bad to worse instead of being resolved, no longer had the luxury of waiting for Miss S, whose arrival was 3 weeks away. 4 days have passed since I saw him again. My neck, as you might expect, has gotten significantly better, and although I still have some marks, my physical strength is clearly recovering. The fever has gone down, and there are no more physical problems. However, that was only a physical story, and I was always scared, whether it was morning or night. I was so scared to think about when and where he would appear. Sleepless nights continued. I could hardly eat anything, and I was constantly concerned about the air around me. In just about 10 days, I think my face changed a lot. I, who was driven to the edge mentally, had no time left. Of course, I couldn't live a proper social life, so I quit my job with the help of my parents. Apparently, I heard later that they were quite sarcastic when they contacted. Anyway, everything was scary. Even just the sight of laundry fluttering and the persimmon tree visible from the house window shaking made me panic, thinking that it might be him. There was still more than 2 weeks left until the arrival of Miss S. It was too long for me. My concerned parents forcibly pushed me, who was frightened, into the car and headed somewhere. My father repeatedly said, "Don't worry, it's okay." In the back seat of the car, my mother was holding my shoulder and stroking my head. I wonder how many years it had been since my mother stroked my head. But for me at the time, I had no sense of time, and night fell while moving in the car. It feels embarrassing to say this as someone who's past 20, but perhaps I was comforted by my mother's side, and I fell into a deep sleep for the first time in a while. When I woke up, the sun was already up, and I felt refreshed after sleeping for the first time in a while. Apparently, I had been asleep for a full day and a half. I probably won't sleep that long again. When I looked outside, the car was moving in an unfamiliar landscape. Gradually, familiar landscapes began to enter my eyes. A train was running in the middle of the road. The car had arrived in Nagasaki. Even I was surprised at this. Apparently, they thought about me, who had been scared continuously, avoided planes and Shinkansen, and chose to travel by car. Even though they seemed to have taken breaks many times along the way, my father, who kept driving the car without sleeping well, and my mother, who kept snuggling with me so I wouldn't get scared, their kindness seems impossible to pay back even if I spent a lifetime. My grandparents live in a place called Yanagawa in Nagasaki. When we arrived in Yanagawa, my parents parked the car at the bottom of the slope and went to call my grandparents. The house of my grandparents is up a flight of stone steps from the side of the slope. While they were gone, I was left alone in the car. The reason why my parents left together was to help carry the luggage to the houses of my grandparents and Ms. S, who had poor legs, but I think it's proof that I was underestimating the situation when I said myself, "I'm fine, go ahead." Maybe I was relieved because I was able to sleep for the first time in a while, and because Nagasaki, where I am now, was far away from Tokyo and Saitama. As I was sitting in the back seat of the car, drawing my legs in, like sitting in gym class, and idly looking out, a pain suddenly ran through my neck. The pain was so severe, it's probably an exaggeration, but it was beyond compare with the pain I'd felt before. When I touched my neck, it was slippery. I was bleeding. The blood on my fingertips involuntarily pulled me back to reality. Before I could think that I was scared or that he might be nearby, I was just disillusioned, thinking, not again. I was so fed up that I started crying. I hope you understand, but it's really depressing when bad things keep happening with a little gap in between. It's hard when something bad happens as soon as you start sorting out your feelings. Especially at this time, when I was a little relaxed, so even more so, I was muttering to myself, "What the hell am I supposed to do? And give me a break," as I cried. When my parents brought my grandparents back to the car, they immediately panicked. Because after all, there was me, the problem, crying with my head down in the back seat, bleeding from my neck. There's no reason why there would be nothing wrong. What happened? Can you say something? I can't stand it anymore. Chan, hold yourself together. What's wrong? What should we do? At that time, I accidentally shouted, "You guys are so fucking loud!" I didn't think I could explain in a situation like this, and even though they couldn't do anything about it, I wanted them to shut up. On my own, I was forced to quit my job, almost got fooled, even though they are the people who are running around for me, who is such a loser. Looking back now, I'm really embarrassed. So, for the first time in my life, my dad suddenly slapped me on the left cheek. It hurt like hell. My dad was very strict, and we had quarreled many times, but I think I had never been hit once since I was born. It was a matter of course for my father not to hit his children. I've heard it many times since I was a child.